Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here. Let's get right to it. I'd like to bring you something a little different today. It's not a dream, but it is something that has to do with the supernatural. This is one of the most profound things, well, it is the most profound thing that ever happened to me in my entire life, and it has to do with the supernatural. And when I say supernatural, this is what I mean. There is a natural world and there is a spirit world, and that is the way God created it. God is the creator of the universe, and God is spirit. His Son is God. The Holy Spirit is God. That is the Trinity. They are three in one. Everything that happens to the believer in the supernatural needs to point towards Jesus Christ. I'm not going to tell you this story to jazz you up on the spirit world or to emphasize anything other than Jesus is Lord, and He died for us, and He saved us, and He made a way for us to live forever with Him. That is the purpose and my motive behind telling you this story, and that should be your takeaway. In May of 2002, it's kind of hard to say when it's 2022. So this was 20 years ago that this happened. My daughter, who was 11 years old, passed away. Her name is Amanda. She was born with a disease called cystic fibrosis. And our whole life with her, our whole 11 years, was spent in and out of hospitals, administering IV medications, and just trying to keep her alive. I don't really want to emphasize or go into the backstory very much. Suffice to say, we were in and out of the hospital all the time, for weeks at a time, sometimes months at a time. So that was our life with her, and she was a tremendous blessing to us. But the greatest blessing that we got from her life was actually experiencing her death. 10 days before she finally passed away, we had been in the hospital a month. It did not look good. Our pediatrician had already told us she's probably not going to make it through the weekend. We had already signed a do not resuscitate paper, knowing her death was imminent. And we knew her body could not withstand the trauma of resuscitation. And so we signed that paper, and on the morning we did that, I went to her bedside and I said, "Amanda, are you seeing the angels?" And she nodded her head yes. I think I quit breathing for a minute. It was so profound. I literally looked around the bed to see if maybe I could get a glimpse of them. I asked her, "Are they with you now?" And she said yes. And I said, "They're around your bed?" She said yes. I took another look. I was like, oh my word, I am sitting in the presence of angels, and my child can see them, but I cannot. I asked her, I said, "Are they petting on you? Do they want you to get better?" And she said, yeah. I said, "Do they want you to go with them?" And she said, yes. And then I said, "Is Jesus there?" And she nodded her head yes. Now think about this. Think about what it felt like. I sat there on the edge of this bed in ICU in Lubbock, Texas, beside my daughter. And she could see angels, and she could see the Son of God. And she could affirm to me, "He's right here beside us, Mama." Now, let me tell you, she was very weak, and so I did not want to ask her a lot of questions that she had to speak. So I asked her yes/no questions. So when I asked her, do they want you to go with them? And she said yes. And I said, do you want to go with them? She said no. And for 10 days, I asked her that question. You see, at night, the grandmothers would stay with Amanda at the hospital, and I would go home and take care of my other daughter, who was younger, Taylor. Mike was there with us. We were surrounded by our family during that time. Every morning, I would come back to the hospital, and I would sit beside Amanda, and I would say, were you with the angels last night? And she would say yes. And I would say, do they want you to go with them? And she would say yes. And then I'd say, do you want to go? And she would always say no. We knew she was dying. And I hated for her to leave kicking and screaming, if that makes sense. I decided I would ask her what it was like to be with these angels. Because when she slept, she was with them. So I asked her, are the angels funny? And she nodded her head yes. I said, do they have wings? She said no, which is interesting. I asked her one day, I said, are there other children there? And she said yes. I said, do you play with them? And she said yes. I said, do the angels play with you? Oh, yeah. I said, can you run? Can you run real fast there, Amanda? And she said, yes. You see, in the natural, Amanda was too weak to run. In fact, during those last days, we had a wheelchair for her. So for her to be able to run was really amazing. One day, I even asked her, I said, are our pets there, the ones that had died? We had a pet named Dandy and a pet named Fifi. They were poodles, our family dogs. And I said, are they there? And she said, yes. And she can pet them and be with them. One time I asked her, I said, is it just beautiful there? Is it green and mountains? And she said, no, I mean, it's beautiful, but it didn't look like that. I said, what about music? Can you hear music? And she nodded her head, yes. I said, is it the most beautiful music you've ever heard? Oh, yes. Yes. You see, in that 10 days, God lifted the veil for me and for Amanda for 2 different reasons. He knew Amanda needed it to be able to leave this life and go into the next life. I needed it to know that my daughter was going to be cared for by the perfect caregiver, Jesus. So then one evening, I was sitting beside Amanda's bed, and this young resident came in, and he was going to be the resident for the month. He had looked at her chart. She wasn't getting enough calories. She wasn't getting enough fat, blah, blah, blah. And I looked at him and I said, sir, if you can save the day, you go talk to our doctor about it. We've been told that Amanda's not going to make it through the weekend. But if you can save her, go save her somewhere else. And he left the room. Well, I thought Amanda was asleep during that time, and I was very surprised when she took her oxygen mask off and she said, Mama, I'm not ready to die. I don't want to die. And I said, just a minute, baby. Let me go get your daddy. You see, the hospital had set up a room next door for us to have our family members in, and that's where Mike was. So I went and got Mike, and we went back into Amanda's room, and we sat on the end of the bed with her. And Mike said, Amanda, when you're with the angels, is Jesus there? And she said, yes. And I asked her, I said, is it like you can crawl up into his lap and actually sit with him? Does he hold you? And she said, yes. Then Mike said, baby, Amanda, the next time you're with the angels, you ask Jesus what he thinks you should do. The next morning, when I went in, I asked her, were you with the angels? Yeah. Do they want you to go with them? Yeah. Are you ready? Yes. That day, we said goodbye to her. I brought her sister up, Taylor, who was 7 years old, to say goodbye to her older sister. And I can't even bear to share that. But it was life-changing. And so, after we said goodbye to her that day, the next morning when I went in, she had already gone to sleep and wasn't going to wake up. She was still breathing, but we knew the end was near. There are other things that happened during that time that I'm going to share with you in another podcast that were quite profound and very supernatural in the Holy Spirit. Mike and I sat there with her while her breathing slowed, and our pediatrician came in at 11:15 that morning. He had been with us the entire 11 years of fighting this battle of cystic fibrosis. Why he came at that time of day, he only explains as, I just knew I was supposed to come up here. The Holy Spirit had given him an overwhelming sense of get to the hospital, get to Amanda, and so he did. He hadn't been in the room probably 5 minutes when Amanda breathed her last. We were on each side of her as she died. Now then, we had prayed her whole life for healing. We asked for healing in the natural, but it was at the moment of her death that she had been perfectly healed in the supernatural, no longer in pain, no longer sick. There are worse things than death. Suffering, watching your child suffer, is worse than death. So I tell you this story to point to Jesus, and only to point to Jesus. The reason Amanda lived and died was to glorify Him through this experience that I'm sharing with you now. And it is to His glory I want you to ponder on this. This was a near-death experience. It didn't happen to me, but I was sitting by death as death occurred. I don't know why God did this for us, but I do know I'm meant to share it. So I'm sharing it with you now. There is a God, and His Son is Jesus, and His gaze is with you, and He's beside you. If He can sit by my 11-year-old daughter while she breathed her last breath, then I promise you, He's beside you every moment and every step of your day. If you can't figure out that He loves you and wants you to draw near to Him, if this story doesn't affirm that for you, I don't know what will. He cares about you. Give your life to Him. Believe in Him. Follow Him. And when you die, because we're all going to die unless he comes back and gets us first. Your death experience will be one filled with angelic beings and beautiful music. You have a choice. You have two ways to die, with Jesus or without him. It's up to you. It's your choice. He gives us free will. I choose to die with Jesus. And let me tell you something. We had told Amanda, you have our permission to die. You get to go to heaven first. We'll be there later, I promise you. And the number one goal of my life since that moment has been to make sure I'm going to get there and to make sure my other children and family members will join us there. That's the goal. That's the life goal. And in the meantime, we obey God and glorify him through Jesus Christ. I hope you ponder on this today, and I hope this makes your walk with Christ more real and more powerful. That's all I've got. There's going to be more. I have more to this story, so be watching for it. But for now, I'm going to leave you with this. Stay safe. Stay close to God. Bye-bye.